two news stories that broke this week that hardly got any media attention at all. One of them was in the Daily. In fact, I think they were actually both published in the Daily Mail. The first one was about an SAS soldier who had served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. So this is a man in his 60s. By all accounts, he had a distinguished career in the Special Forces, in the regular army, then in the Special Forces, retired, living a quiet life somewhere in the UK, and he gets called to an inquest. Now, if anyone remembers the Troubles in Northern Ireland, which all of us who served there obviously do, Northern Ireland is a very different place now to what it was 30 years ago. There's still a certain amount of terrorist threat. I think the threat level in Northern Ireland is probably the same as it is in the UK, except ours is from dissident Republicans, so-called dissident Republicans. However, in 1987, 1989, 1990, when a lot of these battles between the SAS and the IRA were taking place, Northern Ireland was an extremely dangerous place for members of the security, both on duty and off duty. The case that this veteran, this Special Forces veteran, has been dragged before they're trying to drag him before the courts for, was an attempted murder or plan to murder a member of the security forces, an off-duty UDR man. The UDR was the Ulster Defence Regiment. It was a local regiment. Many of the men that served in the UDR were part-time soldiers. They were doing it because they wanted to protect their country. They were doing it because they were loyal to the country, and they wanted to do something legally to fight against the IRA. So the UDR was a regiment of the British Army, and they took a real onslaught from the Provisional IRA, the INLA, and other Republican groups. Anyway, there was a guy that was a target of an IRA assassination squad. This assassination squad, between them, I think, had murdered about 100 people, allegedly. One of the guys alone was said to be responsible for about 40 killings. So these people were serial killers, mass murderers, very, very dangerous, dedicated terrorists. One of them was, I think, the uncle or the cousin of the now Deputy First Minister, Michelle O'Neill. And there's an inquest into their deaths and what happened to them. Basically, they were on a job, they were going to assassinate, or murder, I should say, a member of an off-duty member of the UDR. The police had obviously got a tip-off. The police the SAS put an operation together with Special Forces, no doubt members of other covert units like 14th Intelligence Unit, possibly E4, the police's undercover unit. And the mission was always either to capture or stop the attack happening, obviously using minimal force. The terrorists drove into the area where they were going to carry out the attack. The SAS engaged the terrorists. There was a gun battle. The car burst into flames. All the terrorists were killed, and apparently their bodies were burnt so that they couldn't even be recognised as a result of the ambush. Now, there's a saying that says, all's fair in love and war. Despite there never being a conflict officially called a war in Northern Ireland, it certainly was a war. Whether people like it or not, the IRA treated it as a war, and the British Army treated it as a very, very low intensity conflict. And when people go on a mission armed to the teeth with assault rifles and pistols and arrive in an area where they think they're going to ambush a target, and they're met by Special Forces soldiers, there's probably only going to be one outcome, and it's not going to be good for the terrorists. And that's great. Anyway, to cut a long story short, this gentleman, this SAS soldier who was involved in the operation, it was requested that he went to an inquest in Northern Ireland. The man suffers from PTSD, and because of the situation as it was in Northern Ireland, many soldiers that went through the stresses and strains of serving in Northern Ireland, whether in Special Forces regiments or even in normal infantry regiments that were constantly patrolling, constantly under that stress of potential of attack, constantly on duty and off duty, it affected a lot of soldiers. And if you're in the special forces, that guy's probably done loads of tours as a regular soldier, and then tours as an undercover soldier and as an SAS soldier. So quite understandably, he doesn't want to go back to Belfast to an inquest. So he was willing to give his evidence, I think, through video link or some other way, but no, they've requested that he went to Northern Ireland. He said, I can't do it. My PTSD is too bad. I can't do it. A court in Scotland has just sentenced that man, I think, to 6 months in prison for contempt of court. Now it's being appealed and he's not in prison at the minute. This is an SAS soldier who served his country with distinction. He's been threatened with being dragged before the court. And there are other undercover soldiers who have been dragged through the mill in the past 30 years. There are regular soldiers. Dennis Hutchins, who I had the pleasure of meeting, an absolute gentleman, was also dragged through the courts and actually died of COVID in hospital in Belfast instead of with his family. He was a very, very sick man anyway, he had cancer. So this is, again, another indication of the way the British military and the British establishment is treating its heroes. And believe you me, I served in the regular army. I was never in the special forces. I served as a regular soldier. Did the best I could, as you know, in my own regiment. But the SAS guys are in a different league. They are far more professional. They are the elite of the elite. They are the best soldiers in the world. And for them to get dragged through the courts and prosecuted, what is that going to do for morale in the SAS and in the special forces community? And then, of course, we've got this other incident in Syria where a jihadist wearing a suicide vest was killed by an SAS team, and 5 members of that SAS team are now being investigated for murder. This was a jihadist in Syria. They're on an operation. Now, why are SAS soldiers still operating in Syria without anybody knowing about it? That's one question. And 2, why haven't they got the full protection of the military? And apparently it's military top brass that are pushing for this. And then we have the other incident that has been very widely reported. Now, this guy isn't getting hauled before the courts, but he goes by the name of Christian Craighead, I think it is. Geordie lad, SAS soldier. His nickname's Obi-Wan Nairobi. He went into a hotel in Kenya that had been taken over by terrorists where innocent people were being slaughtered. He went in alone, tooled up, and I think allegedly took out about 20 insurgents on his own. I think I'm right in saying that. Took out a large number of insurgents. I could be wrong about those figures actually, so go and fact check me on that. But anyway, he went in. No, I think it was considerably less than that. But he went in and he took on the enemy and he killed the enemy on his own, pretty much with a few Kenyan Special Forces guys and policemen with him, as far as I know. When he did that, he became an embarrassment to the British government. And the British government, he got no award for it. He when you look at what he did, he should have got a Victoria Cross, a George Cross, or whatever it would be for doing something like that in Kenya. He got no award. And he's actually moved to the United States because of the way he was treated and because of the way he was looked down on by people even that were commanding the SAS. But certainly in the top brass of the Ministry of Defence, and even worse, the Foreign Office, were disgusted with what he did in case it had caused an international incident. Now, think about this. That is the way our Special Forces soldiers are being treated. And not just Special Forces soldiers, any soldiers that have been involved in a conflict. I can tell you through personal experience. I'll give you a couple of anecdotal incidents. One, in Armagh City in the 80s. We're on patrol, gunshots. We follow up to the gunshots. We get to a hedge line, burst through the hedge line, and there's a guy standing there with a weapon. Now, luckily, the first guy through the hedge was not some gung-ho wannabe Rambo, and he didn't open fire. But we were ready to shoot. Our weapons were made ready. When we got to the source of that gunfire, we were going to shoot. Turned out there was a guy. It was a shotgun. He had a shotgun in his hands. If he'd have raised that weapon, he would have been shot. He panicked, and everyone screamed and put the gun down. He put the gun down, and he was genuinely just out shooting. But all we heard was 2 rounds. Obviously, it was a shotgun round, but when you hear, shooting, you don't straight away differentiate and say it's a shotgun. If we'd have handled that wrong, that guy would have been shot, and goodness knows we could have been on a murder charge now. And by the terms of the yellow card, which was the rules of engagement in Northern Ireland, we could have shot that guy. We could have shot him under the terms of yellow card. We didn't. I'm glad we didn't, because I'm sure there would have been an investigation, a big Stewards inquiry. Another incident in West Belfast. We've just come out of a security force base. Some of our guys have gone firm, overlooking a place called Kelly's Corner. As we're going firm, a guy runs across the road, fleeting glance, G3 rifle, balaclava, combat jacket. We didn't have a chance to get any rounds off. It was just too quick, right? Followed up, the guy had gone. If we'd have shot him, this is what I've always thought about that incident. If we'd have shot that guy with the rifle, there's no doubt in my mind that by the time we got there, we were about 300 meters away. By the time we got there, the rifle would have gone, the balaclava would have gone, and we'd have shot an innocent guy in a combat jacket. Or that's the way the story would have gone. And incidentally, we had attempts on our life in that area on a number of occasions on patrol in Ballymurphy, New Barnsley, Turf Lodge, that area. So it wasn't like it was a safe area. So the point I'm making is, it's very easy for people to look in hindsight and say, well, he should have done this, he should have done that, he shouldn't have opened fire. Until you're in that situation where you're under contact or your life's in danger. I'll give you another example in Newry, a place called Barcroft Park. There was a guy about to drop a breeze block on my head. One of my mates saw what was happening, got his baton gun out, and literally just popped him in the face, shot him in the face with a baton round. Didn't kill him. He was injured. He went to hospital. And I think it was on life support machine for some time. He was in critically injured for some time. Thankfully, he didn't die. Thankfully, I didn't get a breeze block dropped on my head. But again, that was totally legitimate because my life was being put in danger. The guy that fired the baton gun, the plastic bullet, was defending me, defending my life. And the guy that got hit, he was a rioter, and he was going to do something that could have been extremely dangerous. So these things happen, and there's other stories. I could bore you with the details of other stories. Obviously, Northern Ireland in the 1980s was violent, but obviously nowhere near as violent as Syria in the middle of a civil war. And yet people are pointing the finger at soldiers. These are men, no doubt. These men in the MOD and in the higher echelons of the military that are trying to drag these heroes before the court and charge them. I'm sure many of them haven't even had a schoolyard fight, let alone had terrorists trying to murder them, or people shooting at them, or people trying to kill them in riots, or whatever it is. I'm sure they've never been anywhere near the front line, or if they have, it's been a fleeting few months on their career trajectory up through the ranks. Be very surprised if any of these men have actually seen any real active service, but they're quite happy to throw special forces soldiers on the bus. And the same with these legal eagles, these judges and these lawyers and these prosecutors that are trying to drag soldiers before the court. These are the same soldiers that kept them alive during the Troubles, that stopped the two sides tearing each other apart. And believe you me, if Northern Ireland had been allowed to be fully unleashed like it could have been, it would have been a lot worse than it was. The men that did the undercover work in Northern Ireland, I have the privilege of knowing some of them. The men that did undercover work, whether it was policemen, soldiers or undercover soldiers, they are heroes. It's as simple as that. When we were just out patrolling, walking the streets, we did what we did. But the guys that did the heavy lifting were the guys that took the very, very real risks. And what they did was nothing short of incredible. And you see, the terrible thing about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, I want to finish on this, the terrible thing about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and I've said this many times before, John Major, because John Major is partly responsible, massively responsible actually, and Liar Blair, the Blair Witch Project, they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Anybody that's in the know, that knows what really happened, knows that the Provisional IRA were on their knees. They were facing arrest. Leaders were facing years and years in prison. Every time they did an operation, they were either arrested or killed. There was informants everywhere. And again, as this Operation Canova inquiries is proving, the head of the internal security unit of the IRA was an informant, along with other people in the internal security unit were agents or working for the state. And those things are documented, so I'm not saying anything that's groundbreaking on you. You know, you could talk about men like John Joe McGee and so on and so forth. An ex-SBS man, incidentally. So a very murky war, a very murky time. But the reality is that nobody from that time, in my opinion, that served in the military should be getting dragged before the courts now, so many years on. It is disgusting. The only people who seem to have got away with it are the terrorists. The dirty, rotten, murdering terrorists who brought mayhem and murdered scores of innocent people, even with all the fantastic work that the security forces did. Terrorists have got away with mass murder, and many of them parade themselves around Stormont pretending to be politicians. Well, in my eyes, they'll never be politicians. They'll always be murdering scum. But that's where we are. We're now in a situation where heroes are being treated as villains, and villains are being paraded as heroes and peacemakers. And again, nothing could be further from the truth. The IRA lost the war and won the peace. And our soldiers are the sacrificial lambs that have been thrown to the wolves, and it's disgusting. See you all soon.